like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey yo, listen.
What you want?
Drop it low to the flow. Oh,
Like it like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh. Are you ready for this?
Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into a topic that I think you're going to find really, really interesting. We're going to be looking at the experiences of immigrants and their descendants in the EU.
Okay.
And, we always have a ton of information to work with for these deep dives, and this one is no different. We've got research reports, we've got questionnaires, and we've got technical analyses, all just waiting to be unpacked.
Sounds pretty dense.
It is. But as always, we've done the hard work and sifted through it all for you. We're going to bring you the most interesting and thought-provoking insights from all of this material, and particularly from this one key source, the EU survey on immigrants and descendants of immigrants.
Right. I've heard of that one. It's a pretty big deal, isn't it? Covers a lot of ground.
It does. 15 different EU countries, multiple generations of immigrants, and it looks at their experiences across all kinds of areas: employment, housing, education, even social interactions.
Wow. So it really paints a complex picture then, I guess.
It really does.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in, shall we? One of the first things that really struck me was this. The survey found that immigrants with higher levels of education were actually more likely to report experiencing discrimination. Now, that seems a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does. You'd think it would be the other way around.
Right.
Maybe they're just more aware of it, more attuned to those subtle forms of discrimination that others might miss.
Yeah, that's a good point. Or maybe they're just more likely to report it because they're more aware of their rights and how to exercise them.
That's true.
So maybe it's a bit of both, right?
Probably. It's a really interesting finding, though, isn't it?
It is, and it raises a lot of questions about the nature of discrimination and how it operates in different contexts. If you're more educated, you might have higher expectations for how you should be treated.
I see.
And you're also more likely to be working in professional settings where those subtle forms of bias are maybe more prevalent.
Right, right. This really underscores the importance of awareness, I think, both on the part of individuals and on the part of society as a whole.
Definitely.
People need to understand their rights.
Absolutely.
And we need to create environments where everyone feels comfortable speaking out against discrimination.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of awareness, the survey also looked at how familiar people are with something called equality bodies in different EU countries.
Equality bodies.
Yeah, these are organizations that are set up to promote equality and combat discrimination.
Oh, right, right.
But what's interesting is that there's a lot of variation across countries. Some countries have really strong equality bodies. They're well known and well utilized.
Yeah.
But in other countries, people are barely aware they even exist.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So even if you know your rights, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the means to actually seek help or redress.
That's a good point. It's like, what's the point of knowing your rights if you don't know how to enforce them, right?
Exactly.
You need access to those support systems.
You do. Access to justice is a crucial part of the equation. It's not enough just to know your rights. You need to be able to exercise them. And that's where things like legal aid and support services become so important.
Right. So it's about more than just awareness. It's about access too.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about discrimination and awareness. But another big issue that came up in the survey was the challenge of finding affordable housing.
Oh, yeah. Housing. That's a big one.
It is. Access to safe and affordable housing is a fundamental human right. But it's something that a lot of immigrant communities really struggle with.
It makes sense. It's tough enough for anyone to find affordable housing these days, let alone if you're new to a country and maybe facing language barriers or cultural differences.
Yeah, exactly. And this survey really dives into this, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It looks at things like home ownership rates, overcrowding, housing conditions, and even whether people could afford to keep their homes adequately warm. Basic stuff that a lot of us take for granted.
Wow. So it's really in depth.
It is. And the findings are pretty sobering. We see that immigrants are much more likely to be living in overcrowded conditions, to be renting rather than owning their homes, and to be struggling with high housing costs.
Yeah. That doesn't sound good.
It's not. It's really eye-opening.
Okay.
You look at these numbers and you realize just how significant the housing challenge is for a lot of immigrants.
Right.
And it makes you think about the broader implications. If you're constantly worried about putting a roof over your head, how can you focus on other things, like finding a job, getting an education, or just building a stable and secure life for yourself and your family.
It's true. Housing insecurity can have a ripple effect on every other aspect of your life.
Exactly. And it could even have long-term consequences, making
Yeah.
it harder for people to escape poverty and achieve their full potential.
You're right. It's a really important issue.
It is. And it's something that we need to address if we want to create a more equitable and inclusive society.
Absolutely. So, what does the survey say about what we can do about it?
Well, it emphasizes the importance of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights and the European Pillar of Social Rights in tackling these issues.
Right, right.
These frameworks provide a roadmap for how we can ensure that everyone has access to decent housing, regardless of their background or circumstances. It's a multi-pronged approach, right? It involves addressing systemic inequalities, providing adequate social assistance, and making sure people have equal access to essential services, like housing.
So it's not a quick fix. It's going to require systemic change.
Exactly. And this is where the survey's data becomes so valuable, right? Because it gives us a really detailed picture of the problem. Remember, they didn't just send out online surveys. They conducted thousands of face-to-face interviews to gather this information.
Wow. In person.
Yeah. 9 countries in person, 6 more online.
Yeah.
So it's a really rich and detailed data set.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And the technical reports go into even more detail about how this massive survey was put together. It's like peeking behind the curtain and seeing the inner workings of a really huge social science research project. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
I bet. So they really went all out, huh?
They did. And what's really impressive is the level of rigor and transparency. They've documented every step of the process, from the sampling methods they used, to the training the interviewers received, to the quality control measures they put in place.
So we can be pretty confident that this is good data then, huh?
We can. And that's really important, right? Because this data can be used to inform policy decisions,
Right.
to make real changes in people's lives.
So it's not just an academic exercise.
Absolutely not. It's about real people and real lives.
Yeah, okay. So how do they even go about doing a survey this big? I mean, do they just go door to door in all these countries? It seems like that would be pretty hard to pull off.
Well, it wasn't quite door-to-door, but it was a huge undertaking. They used a few different sampling methods to make sure they were capturing a diverse range of experiences, like multi-stage clustered sampling and location sampling.
Okay, but I'm not a statistician. What does all that even mean?
Well, imagine you're trying to bake a cake that represents all the different flavors in a giant bakery, right? You couldn't just take a bite from one corner and assume that represents the whole thing.
I guess not.
You need to sample from different sections, different types of cakes, different layers. That's what they did here. Different approaches to get a true sense of the variety.
Okay, so it's all about making sure that your sample is really representative of the whole population.
Exactly.
And they went to the trouble of doing that across, what was it, 15 countries?
Yep. And that's especially challenging, right?
Right.
When you're dealing with a population as diverse and geographically dispersed as immigrants in the EU. So, they used all these different sampling approaches to make sure they were getting a wide range of experiences, even from those who might be harder to reach.
Makes sense. That must have been a logistical nightmare, though, right? Getting all of that organized.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about the sampling either. They also went to great lengths to make sure that the data they collected was really high quality.
Like how?
The technical reports go into great detail about the training that the interviewers received, the quality control measures that were in place,
Right.
and all the weighting adjustments that they made to account for any potential biases in the sample.
Okay, so they were being really thorough then.
They were. It's a really meticulous and thorough process.
So we can be pretty sure that we're working with good data here.
We can.
Yeah.
And that's what gives us confidence in the findings.
Right. It's not just like anecdotal evidence or anything. It's based on proper scientific research.
Exactly.
And that's what makes it so useful for making policy decisions
Yeah.
and actually making a difference.
Absolutely. Data can be such a powerful tool for advocacy and for creating a more just and equitable society, but only if it's good data.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. So this data is legit. But it can't all be just numbers and charts, right? What about the human side of this? What about the stories of the people behind the data?
That's such a great point. While the statistics are really important, it's those personal stories that really bring this issue to life.
Exactly.
And the survey questionnaire actually delves into some very personal and sometimes sensitive topics.
Like what?
Well, they ask people about their experiences with harassment, police stops, even hate-motivated violence. Tough stuff.
Yeah, definitely not easy topics to talk about, but really important to understand, I think.
Absolutely. They give us a glimpse into the hopes, fears, and aspirations of people who are often marginalized and misunderstood.
Right. And they remind us that we're not just talking about abstract concepts here. We're talking about real people, with real lives and real stories to tell.
Exactly. And those stories deserve to be heard. It's really powerful stuff, just thinking about all these people and their experiences. So let's look at some more of the specifics from this survey, shall we?
Sure.
One area that really stood out to me was employment.
Yeah, employment is always a big one when we're talking about integration. What did you find?
Well, what I thought was interesting was that the survey doesn't just look at overall employment rates, right? It actually digs into the types of contracts people have.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it turns out that immigrants are significantly more likely to be working under temporary contracts compared to permanent ones.
That makes sense, I guess. It's probably harder to get a permanent position when you're new to a country.
Yeah, and it means, less job security, fewer benefits.
Right, right. Makes it harder to plan for the future.
Exactly. And I think it suggests there's probably, a potential disadvantage when it comes to career progression as well.
Yeah, for sure. If you're not sure how long you'll be in a particular job, you're less likely to invest in training or take on more responsibility. It's a bit of a vicious cycle.
It is, and the survey goes even deeper than that, asking people about their actual experiences in the workplace.
Really? What kind of things do they ask about?
Well, there's one question that really stuck with me. They asked participants if they've ever been given tasks below their qualifications because of their ethnic or immigrant background.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty blatant, isn't it?
It is. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just straight up discrimination.
And sadly, the survey data suggests that these types of experiences aren't all that uncommon.
That's really disheartening.
There's another question that asks about being denied a promotion because of your background.
I bet that happens a lot too.
It does. And it just paints this picture of the very real barriers that many immigrants face in the workplace.
Right. And you have to wonder how much talent and potential are we wasting because of these biases?
It's a huge loss, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole. I mean, when people are held back from reaching their full potential, we all miss out.
Totally agree.
So the big question is, what can we do about it?
Well, the survey does touch on that a bit, right? They asked about awareness and use of those equality bodies.
They do.
Mhm.
And that's really interesting because, well, what we see is that there's a lot of variation between countries.
How so?
Well, in some places, people are very aware of these bodies and feel comfortable turning to them for help if they need it. But in other places, there's much less awareness. It's almost like, depending on where you live, your chances of getting support are totally different.
So it's almost like a postcode lottery then.
Yeah, kind of. And that highlights this need for not just having strong equality bodies, but also for making sure that people know about them and how to actually access them.
Right. So it's not enough just to have these organizations in place. You have to make sure people know they exist.
Exactly. And that means things like public awareness campaigns, educational programs, even just making sure that information about these bodies is readily available in multiple languages.
Okay, yeah. We need to meet people where they are, right?
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about employment, but another big area that the survey covers is housing.
Ah, yeah, housing. We talked about that a bit earlier. Big issue.
It is. And the survey really gets into the nitty-gritty of this, asking about everything from like tenure status to the types of amenities that are available in the home.
So it's not just about whether you have a roof over your head, it's about the quality of that housing, too.
Exactly. And the data really shows a significant gap between immigrants and the general population when it comes to housing affordability.
Meaning?
Well, they're much more likely to be what we call rent burdened.
Rent burden.
Yeah, meaning they're spending a really large portion of their income on housing costs.
Oh, wow. So they're really stretched thin then.
They are. And we know that that kind of financial strain, it has a huge impact on, well-being.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that kind of stress can lead to anxiety, depression, all sorts of problems.
Exactly. And it makes it really hard to just make ends meet, especially for families with kids.
Yeah, it's tough.
There are even questions in this survey about whether people can afford to do really basic things like keep their homes adequately warm, or replace like worn out furniture.
Geez, I hadn't thought about that. That's rough.
It is. And it just really highlights this need for policies that address the root causes of housing inequality.
Like what?
Well, things like increasing the supply of affordable housing. providing rental assistance and combating discrimination in the housing market.
Okay, yeah, big systemic changes.
They are. But they're essential if we want to create a more just and equitable society.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about discrimination in the workplace and the challenges with housing and the importance of, making sure that people have access to support systems. It's clear that this survey covers a lot of ground. But let's shift gears a bit, shall we?
Sure.
And talk a little bit about the methodology itself. What stood out to you about how this research was actually conducted?
Well, what really impresses me is how they managed to capture such a diverse range of experiences. They used a real variety of sampling methods, like multi-stage clustered sampling, location sampling, and even adaptive cluster sampling in some cases.
Adaptive cluster sampling, what's that? Never heard of it.
It's a way of making sure you're getting a representative sample, even in areas where the population you're interested in is quite spread out.
Okay. So it's all about making sure that the people they surveyed are really a good reflection of the whole immigrant population.
Right, exactly. And that's not easy to do.
Yeah.
Especially when you're working across so many different countries.
Yeah, that makes sense. But wait, so they had people actually going out and doing these interviews, face to face?
In 9 countries, they did face-to-face interviews.
Wow. That's commitment.
It is. And in another 6, they did them online.
Yeah.
But either way, they went to great lengths to make sure that the data they collected was high quality.
Yeah, but how can you be sure? How do you control for bias and all that?
Well, the technical reports, they're super detailed. They talk all about the training that the interviewers had, the quality control measures that were put in place, and all the adjustments they made to account for any potential biases in the sample. It's a very thorough process.
Okay, so it sounds like they really did their homework. They weren't messing around.
No, they definitely weren't.
So we can feel pretty good about the data then.
We can. It's not just anecdotal evidence. It's based on proper scientific research.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. This is solid stuff.
And that's what makes it so valuable, right, for informing policy and making real change.
Yeah, totally.
Data can be such a powerful tool for advocacy and for creating a more just and equitable society, but only if we use it wisely.
Okay, so we've got this really good data. We know it's solid. But let's get back to the human side of things, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about people's lives.
It is. And the survey questionnaire, it includes some really poignant questions.
Oh, like what?
Well, they ask people about things like belonging, identity, and just what it's like to be an immigrant or a descendant of immigrants in Europe today.
Yeah, those are big questions.
They are. And the responses, they can be incredibly powerful. They give us this glimpse into the lives of people who are so often, marginalized and misunderstood.
Right. And it reminds us that we're not just talking about statistics. We're talking about real human beings with real hopes and dreams and fears.
Exactly. And those stories deserve to be heard. Absolutely. And it strikes me that this is where collaboration becomes so important.
Collaboration.
Yeah. It's not enough to just collect data about immigrant communities. We need to involve them in the process.
In the process of what?
Of understanding and using that data.
Oh, I see.
It's about moving beyond just extracting information, right?
Yeah.
And moving towards a more participatory approach to research.
So you're saying we need to make sure that that immigrant communities have a voice
Exactly.
in how this data is used.
Yeah, they need to have a voice in how this data is interpreted and how it's applied.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's about recognizing the expertise that resides within these communities. They're the ones who live these experiences every single day.
Right.
So their insights are invaluable when it comes to developing policies and programs that actually work.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't just impose solutions from the outside.
Right. You can't just come in and say, this is what you need.
Exactly. It has to come from the community itself.
Okay, so we've talked about the why of collaboration, but what about the how? Like, what are some practical strategies,
Practical strategies for what?
for how researchers and policymakers can meaningfully engage with these communities?
Oh, right. Well, I think for starters, it's about building trust.
Trust.
Yeah, approaching these communities with respect, with transparency, and a genuine desire to actually listen.
Yeah.
And to learn.
So it's about building relationships.
Exactly.
Not just extracting information.
You got it. And it's important to remember that different communities have different needs.
Right.
Different priorities. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, tailoring your strategies to the specific context is key.
Absolutely. And be patient.
Patient.
Yeah, because building trust, Building meaningful relationships, it takes time.
It does.
It takes effort.
It's a long-term commitment.
Exactly. It's not a quick fix.
And I think it's also really crucial to be mindful of power dynamics, right?
Power dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, researchers and policymakers, they often hold positions of power.
True.
So we need to be really aware of how that power can influence interactions.
So you're saying we need to approach these communities as equals.
Yeah, not as subordinates.
Got it.
And we need to recognize their agency, their resilience. They're not just passive recipients of policies. They're active agents of change.
Oh, that's such an important point. You know, too often, I think the narrative around immigration just focuses on the challenges, the struggles.
Wow.
And we forget about, the incredible strength and resilience that these communities show every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. And while those challenges are real and they're significant,
Yeah. Oh, of course.
it's also really important to highlight the contributions that immigrants make.
To society.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They bring new ideas, new skills, new perspectives.
Right. They enrich our communities.
They really do in countless ways.
Yeah.
And by focusing on those contributions, I think we can start to shift the narrative
Shifted away from.
one of fear,
Yeah.
othering
Right.
towards one of inclusion, appreciation.
Yeah, that's what we need. We need to recognize the value that diversity brings to our societies.
Absolutely.
And create a space where everyone feels like they belong.
Well said. Well, this deep dive has been a real journey for me,
A journey.
a journey of discovery. We've explored the complexities of immigration in the EU. We've delved into some pretty dense research material.
Yeah, we have.
We've unpacked the human stories
Yeah.
behind the statistics.
It's been fascinating.
It has.
Really eye-opening.
And we've also talked about the importance of moving beyond just research, right? Moving towards action.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just understand these issues.
Right.
We need to work together to create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
You're absolutely right. Data can be such a powerful tool for change, but only if we use it wisely.
And collaboratively.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I really want to encourage you, our listener, to keep exploring these issues.
Yeah, stop.
Talk to your friends and
For
family.
your colleagues.
Learn more about the experiences of immigrants in your community.
And think about how you can be a part of the solution.
Absolutely. Until next time, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah,
Oh,
Like it like that.
yeah, yeah.
Hey yo, listen.
What you want?
drop it low to the flow. Oh, oh,
Like it like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.